When you fear your best friend might hurt you. It was late November back in 2016. Me and my friends have been using mushrooms every chance we got to for many months, completely abusing them. We live in Iceland, and the mushrooms here are really, and I mean really, potent. We had a plan to go to a summer cabin, which my family owned, and the plan was to go over on a weekend. We were to take some shrooms on the Friday, and then mix shrooms with MDMA on Saturday. We would be 4 people in total on the Friday, and 7 or 8 on the Saturday. I will be telling the story of what happened on the Friday evening with me and my 3 friends. Let's just call them Andy, Jack, and Phil. So on the Friday, me, Andy, and Jack wanted to go earlier in the evening because we couldn't wait to get there and start tripping. Phil would finish his shift at around 10 in the evening, and he would then start driving to the cabin, which only takes about 30 minutes. Luckily for us, my father volunteered to drive us there. When we arrived, we made the preparations to create a lemon tech mixture with 2.5 grams of mushrooms each. If you don't know what lemon tech is, it is when you chop the dried mushrooms down and mix them with lemon juice and let it sit for about 15 minutes. What it does, it makes the trip start way quicker, and the trip includes way more intense visuals, and all in all, just a more powerful mushroom trip. But the trip lasts 1 to 2 hours shorter when taking lemon tech, but we didn't care about that because we had about 30 grams of dried mushrooms with us, so we could always take more if needed. So we drank the lemon tech mixture, which is really nasty and was hard to get down. A few minutes later, I needed to take a dump, so I went to the toilet and sat down. And when I had been there for just under 10 minutes, I could immediately start to see the walls move. The visuals started to come on pretty quick, which was really exciting for me. After I went to the bathroom, I suggested walking down to the lake nearby, which is about a 5 to 10 minute walk. So we went there. When we arrived at the lake, we sat down for a bit, and we couldn't really see anything. There were no streetlights there, and we didn't have anything to start a bonfire. So we started to walk back to the cabin, which was really hard because we got lost for a while and walked past the cabin 2 or 3 times, but luckily we found our way back. So back in the cabin we were just sitting on the sofa for a while, enjoying the visuals, and I was having a good time for a while, and I looked over at Jack. He was completely out, and now when I think about it, he was probably in a state of ego death as he just lay there with his eyes closed for about 30 minutes to an hour. Then I looked over at Andy, and I noticed he was crying and his eyes were just flooding. I thought that was really weird, and I asked him if he was okay or if there was something wrong. And he answered me and just told me, "It's nothing, don't worry about it." And then I looked away and started to stare at this painting on the wall, trying to enjoy the visuals and also thinking what might be bothering Andy. But then I looked over to him again, and he was completely staring at me with this really scary and intense mad stare like I did something to him. I asked him, "What?" And he just shook his head and looked away. Now that started to freak me out. I looked away for a few seconds, then back at him, and he was again staring at me with that same scary and intense stare, and as soon as I looked at him, he looked away. Then I thought to myself, maybe this music isn't the right music we should be listening to right now. Maybe it's getting him amped up and angry. We were listening to some hard psytrance music and some hardstyle in between, which really wasn't the right pick of music for this night. So I thought I might change the music, so I walked to the computer, sat in the chair, and changed it to the Dark Side of the Moon album by Pink Floyd. After I switched music, I looked back at Andy, and he again had that psycho stare, but more angry this time, and I asked him, "Are you good, man?" He answered still with that psycho stare, "Never been better, buddy." And then I looked at the computer screen and started to think about the situation that I was in. I started to remember that Andy recently started to take steroids and has gotten quite muscular, and plus he does have a small history of mental issues. On top of that, my father drove us here, and we had no car in case something would happen like him attacking me or something. Jack was still completely out of it and didn't know anything weird was going on. And there were still a few hours until Phil would arrive, so I was just desperately waiting for him. I was really tripping out and thinking about a lot of things. My heartbeat started to raise intensely whilst I was just imagining that he could attack me at any moment. I thought to myself, Andy would never hurt me. We have literally been best friends since 4th grade. But still, he's acting like he is furious at me and wants to kill me. Now I looked away from the computer and at Andy, and when I did, again, he was staring at me and looked away quickly. I was really scared at this moment and thought I'd go out for a cigarette and call my other best friend who was at home to tell him about the situation, but he didn't answer. So I called another one of my closest friends and he answered, and I quickly told him this situation, and he didn't believe me right away, but when he did, he told me to try and play some jolly music, which I already did, as me and Andy both really love Pink Floyd, especially on shrooms. Then, he told me to try and do something fun, which at the time seemed entirely impossible. Then I heard Andy was about to come out, so I quickly hung up the phone and wanted to go inside because I didn't want to be alone outside with Andy, so I went in and walked inside, but I met Andy in the doorway and he asked me who I was talking to on the phone, and I answered and told him I was chatting with our friend back home. He then did something that really scared me. He taunted me by fake punching me and acting like he was going to punch, but stopped the fist close to my face. Then I asked him, "What the hell, dude?" And he went, What? Really loud and got all in my face and stared at me like that for a couple of seconds. Then he continued walking out to have a cigarette. I went in really stressed out and sat on the sofa thinking how it would be like when he would come back in. He came back in a few minutes later and stood there for a while and stared into the air. Then he said, "Something is wrong. I don't feel right. I'm going to go to bed and try to get some sleep." I replied, "You do that, man." I felt really relieved. If you stand in the kitchen of the cabin, you can see into his bedroom, and every time I went into the kitchen, I could see that he left the door open, and he would just lay there staring at the door and at me when I was there in the kitchen. 40 to 60 minutes later, he came back out of the room, still not feeling alright and finding it impossible to sleep. Phil then soon called and told us that he was on the way. I felt like safety was on the way. Then finally, Phil arrived all jolly and so hyped for taking shrooms as it was his first time. He just thought we had been having the time of our lives when no one else knew what had actually been going on. The next day, more people came to the cabin, but this time, me and Andy didn't want to take shrooms with the MDMA like we had planned to begin with. Later in the night, we were all high on MDMA, and Andy asked me to come upstairs to have a chat. He told me that he had the worst trip he could imagine mentally. He told me he had all these delusions about me betraying him and how somehow he thought I had stolen his ex-girlfriend's pants. He told me that he felt nothing but hatred for me and was incredibly angry towards me and wanted to get rid of me. Then Andy went on to say that he never wants to feel that way again towards his best friend and that he was really sorry about all of this. We hugged it out and agreed that it's time for a big break from mushrooms. Moral of the story? Don't abuse mushrooms and don't use mushrooms while on steroids. Also, it's always safer to have a trip sitter.